Today I want to talk about prep and improvisation. When I was a much newer GM, I prepared a lot. I would write up entire pages of notes on what could happen and what NPCs would do and what they thought and things that would happen and how things would go wrong. And that's how I ran my games. And some games were good and some games are bad and pretty even mix. After the bad games, I would think to myself, oh well, that didn't really go out the way I wanted it to. I didn't plan well enough. I need to plan more. And so I would write even more the next time, and I'd come up with even more contingencies, and I'd run my game like that. And sometimes those games would be good, but more often those games would be bad. And it took me a while to realize this, but eventually I did. I realized the more prep I did, the worse the game was, and the worse I felt, and the more stressed I was about running the game. And that seems kind of counterintuitive. Prep is supposed to help. It's like a safety net, so that when things go awry, you fall back on your prep because you've already planned it. You can just do what you already thought you were going to do. Well, there's some sort of insidious drawbacks to prep, and some perhaps unexpected benefits to a more freewheeling improvisational approach. And it's taken me a while to kind of nail these down, but I'm pretty sure they're real. So I want to share them with you. When you go in preparing everything, it's kind of like going in with a hammer. Your hammer is pretty strong, it can hit things pretty hard, but like the saying goes, when you got a hammer in your hand, everything begins to look a bit like nails. And that's kind of what happens when you run a game with a lot of prep. You've got your big beefy hammer, and when the players do something that you're not expecting them to, well, it's like them presenting something that's not a nail. And all you can really do is just hit it with your hammer. And sometimes it's so bad that you really, really can't hit it with a hammer, in which case you're really stressed because you've got no idea what you're supposed to do. You've got your hammer in your hand, and you either have to throw away your hammer, and it took ages to build your hammer, or you just hit it really hard with a hammer, and sometimes things work out and the players correct course and, fall into your prep, and other times it's just a forced, miserable disaster because they're getting hit on the head with a hammer. So that's a big drawback of the prep. The second one is there's the wasted prep. And of course everyone says, well, you prepare some situation and if you don't use it, you use it later. That's totally true. Sometimes you can't. And those times it does suck because that's just time that you put into something and now it's gone. It's not used. It's nothing. And the last is this forced situations because sometimes you've got all your prep and you really love it and you really want to use it and the players do something and it kind of fits with how your prep has planned things out and so your players decide rather than sneaking past the guard, they decide to seduce the guard and convince the guard to let them pass. And so it's like, okay, well, that kind of is the same, and so we're going to have this sort of thing happen. I know that's a lot of hand-wavy stuff, but I hope and I think that you understand what I mean. So these are all some, not severe, not big, but some real drawbacks to having a lot of prep. And so, fortunately, there's alternatives. And the alternative I take is to prepare some things, specifically combat, but for almost everything else, I like to just wing it. And that's probably pretty terrifying. I will usually spend about 10 minutes before a game, and that 10 minutes is usually for combat, so I can stat things up, because I can't prepare those on the fly very well. But everything else, there's no plan. How do you have no plan, you might be asking? Silas, that sounds kind of ridiculous. Well, there are a couple of ways you can go in without a plan. Other thing you might be wondering is, why even go in without a plan? Like, what's even the benefit? Sure, prep is bad, but like, it's got some benefits. I mean, what's improv have to offer? Well, improv has to, you're a lot more responsive when the players decide they want to take a slightly different course of action. You don't have a plan that you're thinking about in your head. You can devote your full attention to what they're doing. I found that when I was doing a lot of prep work, it took a lot of my mental strength to just keep in my head what was going on and what what NPCs were gonna do and what events were gonna happen. It was a lot of work. When I improvise, I'm fully in the moment. I am just listening to what the players are doing because I am listening for hooks. I'm listening for things I can respond to. Because that is what you do differently. Rather than thinking of your prep, you're thinking of what the players are doing. What that means is that when you do come up with stuff, it is much more in tune with what's going on in the story. And this is the huge, huge advantage of this improv-first approach. So how do you do it? Well, there are a few things. The first is to always be looking for how to loop the story back in. You can start with pretty much nothing other than a single idea. The players are in a town, and there's a gang in that town. That's all we're starting with. That's it. I'm ready to run the game, okay? How do you run the game from that? Well, the players are in the tavern, because that's how every game starts these days. Players in the tavern, in their hypothetical situation, and you ask them what they're doing, and let's say one of them's getting some food, one of them gets a drink, one of them's looking around at the other people in the bar. Sweet. That is 3 things that they're doing. That is 3 opportunities to pull our story into the situation. So, first one, they're getting food. Okay, well, they're getting food. How can we tie this into this gang? The food is being served by gang members. Maybe the gang is part of this tavern. The food is purchased from suppliers. Maybe this tavern is being extorted by this gang. So food prices are high. Nothing's available on the menu. Maybe nothing's available on the menu because gang has been stealing supplies of food. So now when the player says they want some food, this is when you insert your, well, actually, when you ask the waiter for your mutton and stew, the waiter says, oh, well, I'm sorry, that's not available. That's kind of weird. Your player's probably going to ask about that. Voila, you have story. Okay? Maybe they want a drink. Okay, they go up to the bartender, ask for a drink. Okay, again, bartender could be part of the gang, the alcohol could not be available, other things, let's see. Also at the bar, I mean, gang members probably like booze, right? Sitting at the bar, you see a grizzled man with a tattoo of a skull with a knife in it. Looks at you and says, you're ordering that? Kind of fishy. I don't know, he says whatever. Voila, you have an NPC, he's part of the gang, he's now injecting himself into the situation. Our third option, looking around. Sweet. Who do the players see? Well, we've got a gang, we've got a tavern, we've got a gang, so how do we stick the gang into the tavern? The players see someone passing money to another person. What's going on? Okay, we don't know any ideas about what our gang is, we're just coming up with random stuff that gangs might do, but if the first idea that pops into your head is some people are exchanging money, well, maybe this gang it's extortion, it's they're exchanging illegal goods, they're paying for drugs, who knows? But now we know that there's money in this gang, conducts business in this tavern. None of these ideas existed yet. Your players just said that they look around, and you just thought, what do gangs do in taverns? Okay, so we've got all these ideas, all from just gang, tavern, and asking, what do you do? Because when the players say what they do, you just take what they do, and you force the gang in it. It works all the time for anything. I promise. Second thing is to introduce an NPC. And we did this when we talked about when the person orders the drink and, you know, the person asks them, oh, that's an interesting drink, why do you order that? Or whatever they're saying. NPCs are the ultimate hook device. You can make them do whatever you want. And you can make the situation happen however you want, but that's a little bit less plausible. With an NPC, you can give them any motivation in the world, and there's all sorts of acrobatics you can do to come up with a scenario in which an NPC could reasonably do anything. And so, if the NPC expresses that they've got a problem, they want the players to do something, they do something that upsets the players, this is another way to inject story into the game. So again, we've got our tavern, we've got our players, maybe you're not even asking them what they do. The players go into the tavern, we have our NPC. Our NPC is a gang member who is holding someone up outside the tavern. The gang member is recently was in a fight. Gang members get into fights all the time, and so when the players walk in, they see a pretty badly beaten gang member who is wrapping their wounds at the table in front of them. Very concerning. Players might be investigating here. Uh, what's great about NPCs is that when the players then go talk to them, it opens up a whole new world of game hooks, things that can add to the story. So when the players go ask, is your arm okay? What's going on? Now's your chance when you can create more story. So your NPC from the gang says, and this is a time where once again you have to come up with something, but you can just look around the room, right around. I got a bag of chocolate chips next to me. Okay, chocolate chips, gang, chocolate chips, cacao, that's drugs, right? Okay, chocolate chips, there's bakery, they're somehow associated with the bakery. Let's say they had a fight with the baker's son. Their story. I've got my earbuds, music. This gang member is part of a gang that performs music and uses music to convey messages in their gang. If you look around and take any random idea and stick it in, it's very easy to come up with ideas, because when you force two opposite and unlikely ideas together, you end up with really, really quality ideas, and it works. If you can come up with any idea, it's going to be good if you combine two disparate, unrelated things. Lastly, is complicate the story while you're waiting. So you stick in some situation. Ideally, you have a moment where the NPCs are, or the players, are talking to each other. This is your time to figure out how to make things nastier, how to make things more complex. So our gang member who's wrapping up his wounds after the fight with the baker's son, the players are discussing whether they should talk to him or not. Or maybe they already have talked to them and they're discussing what they think he is, or whether they think he's telling the truth or not. This is your time to do your prep work, because you know what the players are talking about. You can listen and use their ideas and figure out what's going on based off of those. And this is how you get really, really, really great games, because when you prep beforehand, you don't know what your players are going to do. You don't know how they're going to interact. You hear them planning. This is when you set your plans. And obviously, you can't retroactively make decisions that wouldn't be possible, or would make things happen that the players would have seen earlier, and it wouldn't make sense if they hadn't seen them. That's just off the limits. But there's a lot of things that is on limits. That is allowed. If the players think that the baker said he got in a fight with a baker's son, maybe the baker's son is part of a gang too. Great. Okay, well, that's a great idea. Let's not do exactly that, because, we don't want the players to be too easily right. Let's say the baker's son is, maybe he's bad. Sure, it's a gang member. Maybe the baker's son is also quite bad, but in a different way, and is even worse than the gang members. That's juicy. What's the gang member do? What's this baker's son? What's his shtick? You keep listening to the players, and you think about their backstories, and there's a lot of things hopefully that you know about your world in general. Again, use your players, because they know the world. They've got a player who had a backstory. Use that. If one of your players lost their mother to werewolves, well, there we go. Baker's son is actually a werewolf. Gang member got in a fight with the werewolf. Now we've got some interesting complexities and some moral gray zones. The gang member is bad. He's maybe extorting the bar, but he got in a fight because he wants to kill the werewolf baker's son, because just ravaging the city, the town. So these are all ways of coming up with a story quickly on the fly. All these things you can do during the game, and they will generate story. Again, remember, we started with players start in a tavern and there's a gang. That's it. That's literally it. But if you take unrelated ideas and combine them, if you pull in NPCs, if you loop the story back in and find ways to take the things that do exist and force them into the situation, you will have your game explode. And soon you will find that there are more hooks than you know what to do with. Your story is going in too many directions, and rather than not knowing what's going to happen next and being, wow, my story, there's nothing going on, there will be too many things to keep track of, and you'll have a whole new set of problems, a much, much, much better set of problems. So that's how to prep less and improvise more. Hopefully learn something. I had fun talking to you about it. Thanks so much.